and kings. This he said to me.
Ladies and gentlemen, please turn on your cameras, mute your microphones, refresh your cocktails, and get comfortable. The program will begin in 2 minutes.
Is just to love and be loved in return. There was a boy. Thank you. We hope you really enjoyed that, especially the last line. The greatest thing you'll ever learn is just to love and be loved in return, which is what the Woodstock Institute is all about. And speaking of, we're going to do another song along those lines. This is called On a Clear Day You Can See Forever. On a clear day, rise and look around you, and you'll see just who you really are. On a clear day, how it will astound you that the glow of your being, it outshines every star. You'll feel part of every mountain, sea, and shore. You can hear from far and near a world that you have never.
Good evening, and welcome to Woodstock Institute's Economic Justice Awards. For those that don't know me, my name is Chris Welch, and I am Speaker of the Illinois House of Representatives. I also represent State House District 7, which covers the western suburbs of Bellwood and Westchester and parts of Melrose Park and Maywood and 8 other communities. 2021 has been a historic year in many respects. The Illinois General Assembly passed and Governor Pritzker proudly signed the Legislative Black Caucus agenda, which contained 4 pillars, which included new laws to confront structural racism in our state on several fronts. Among them, as many of you probably know, are the Predatory Loan Prevention Act, which sets a 36% rate cap on consumer loans in Illinois, and the Illinois Community Reinvestment Act, which establishes an affirmative obligation for state banks, credit unions, and non-bank mortgage companies to lend to, invest in, and service low and moderate income communities. Tonight is an opportunity to celebrate these victories and to honor 2 economic justice warriors. Keisha Thompson Warren will be receiving the Advocate of the Year Award. Keisha, a small business owner of color, got trapped by a predatory title loan at 197% interest late in 2019. Beginning last year, Keisha courageously shared her story publicly to the public and to the media and others in order to shed light on the particular form of predatory lending. You'll hear more of her story later in the program, but Keisha's story is especially meaningful to me because I led the effort in 2019 to cap rates on title loans at 36%. During that fight, I learned too well how consumers' embarrassment and shame about getting trapped by a predatory loan prevent many from speaking out about their experience. Those experiences are powerful evidence of the need for reasonable caps on consumer loans, and we're grateful. We're extremely grateful that Keisha chose to speak her truth and to be a voice for others. Tonight's other honoree is also a strong woman of color, a great friend of mine, and she is a warrior, a champion of economic justice. Assistant Majority Leader State Senator Jacqueline Collins serves her district and the people of this state with a determination that is both fierce and gentle. Senator Collins uses facts, not rhetoric, to promote and defend progressive policies that have made our state better. Although she is being honored for lifetime achievement, tonight is no swan song. I know she will continue to raise the bar on what is achievable and will continue to be a role model for junior legislators, especially for women and for legislators of color. Keisha, Jackie, congratulations to you both. And congratulations to the Woodstock Institute on an amazing year. Thank you for being a trusted partner to me and to many of my colleagues. It is now my pleasure to introduce the President and CEO of Woodstock Institute, Horacio Mendez. Take it away, Horacio.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the President and Chief Executive Officer of Woodstock Institute, Horacio Mendez.
Thank you so much, Speaker Welch. Hello and good afternoon to my friends on the West Coast. Good evening to my friends on the East Coast. A very early good morning to our guests in Jakarta. And it's happy hour here in my new hometown of Chicago. Welcome to our 2021 Economic Justice Awards. Now, before we get started, please take a second to rename yourselves on Zoom to your full name and your company so you can network later on. Now, something special happened this morning that made me feel great about today. For reasons that still escape me because none of you will notice, I decided for the first time in 18 months to put on dress pants. And I know this was going to be a great day because they actually fit. So while it's bittersweet to have to do this virtually, I am still thrilled to introduce myself as a president and CEO of the Woodstock Institute, one of the oldest and more storied community financial research and advocacy organizations in the country. From our role in helping to create the original Community Reinvestment Act in 1977 to the Predatory Loan Prevention Act this year, and lots in between. We've never shied away from tough issues and always have the research ready for our partners to use in their work, be they politicians, advocates, bankers, regulators, or community members. But this moment was dangerously close to not happening. Just 18 months ago, Woodstock was at an inflection point, and the board had an incredibly difficult decision to make about its future. Our board chair, Bina Elliott, carried much of this burden. Without her and the generosity of her bank at the time, Fifth Third, none of this would have been possible. For that, I, and for that matter, all of Illinois, owes her a great debt of gratitude. I'm also grateful for the support I've received from our entire board, a who's who of local and national leaders on community reinvestment and responsible lending. Gene Pogge was brought on board on an interim basis to make sure that the next president had solid footing to re-energize Woodstock. As with everything Gene does, she excelled and not only made my transition smooth, she made up for the fact that Chicago's welcome wagon was in quarantine, with everything from inflatable mattresses, pots, pans, towels, and food waiting for me and my family when we showed up to an empty apartment in Oak Park this summer. Most importantly, I want to thank my wife, Nicole, and my two boys, Alejandro and Santiago, who never once questioned my sanity as we drove halfway across the country in the midst of a pandemic, away from everything we knew and everyone we knew, but always knowing it was for the right reason. A public school teacher in the Mission District of San Francisco, Nicole knows better than most the challenges that our communities endure and the many obstacles families face in raising kids to succeed. She is my kindred spirit. So, how did I end up here? Well, there's two things everyone hates: the way things are and change. But when you have to explain to your 11 and 9-year-old boys why that police officer had his knee on Mr. Floyd's neck for so long, why there's a Black Lives Matter movement, and what we're going to do about it, change is really the only viable option. I know I'm not alone in my feeling of frustration. We've all seen this story before. My first was Rodney King and the wave of token gestures that followed. Working at the Federal Reserve at the time, I had a front row seat to the marketing campaign called Rebuild LA. While there were a few success stories like job training programs, it was mostly an exercise in negotiating well-intentioned and media-friendly activities as opposed to figuring out how to actually solve the problem. Because that would have required steps that would be controversial and political. Nobody wants to fund those kind of things. And then I got to see the storyline repeated over and over and over again. 7-year-old girl in Detroit, Ayanna Jones. Here in Chicago, Rekia Boyd. Timothy Russell and Melissa Williams. Jonathan Farrell, Dontre Hamilton, Eric Garner, Michael Brown, Laquan McDonald, Tamir Rice, Tony Robinson, Anthony Hill, Eric Harris, Walter Scott, Freddie Gray, William Chapman, Jonathan Sanders, Sandra Bland, Samuel DeBose, Jeremy McDowell, Corey Jones, Tanisha Anderson, Jamar Clark, Philando Castile, Paul O'Neill, Terrence Crutcher, Alfredo Longo, Botham Jean, Tatiana Jefferson, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd. And that's just a small portion of a heartbreakingly long list. Too often, the public discussion eventually leads to these tragic deaths being explained away as individual choices or innate weaknesses, as if they were somehow detached from the century-long storyline of oppression, neglect, disinvestment, apartheid, and violations of federal law and the 14th Amendment dating back to the end of the Civil War. My ambition is for Woodstock to do what is needed, not what is palatable. That means we may not always get the funding we need to support the projects that'll make the most difference. That's why your support is so important. The money we've raised so far for tonight's events, and from a fantastic list of generous and varied donors, gives us the flexibility to be nimble and responsive. Here's an example. When the predatory lending industry flooded Springfield with lobbyists and misinformation earlier this year, we tapped into precious operating capital to hire our own lobbyist and public relations firm. Now, those are expenses traditional funders usually shy away from. But those are the types of investments that determine whether low-income communities win or lose. If we want to change the map of segregation, of poverty and disadvantage in Chicago, in Illinois, or throughout the country, we need to tackle the issues that will make a difference, irrespective of whether or not it may make people uncomfortable. We need to have policy discussions that push boundaries. And we need the resources to fight communities, to fight for communities with the same tools and tactics as those who see opportunity as a zero-sum game, who think that expanding opportunity for all must mean a loss of opportunity for themselves. We can't be spectators in this battle. We're here tonight to recruit more combatants. So join us, support our work. Let's start tonight by channeling Daniel Patrick Moynihan and say that we're a free country and everyone is entitled to their own opinion. They're just not entitled to their own facts. Everything we're presenting here tonight has been extensively researched and validated from numerous sources. You may choose to differ what you think it means, but you will not find fault in our data or in our historical context. In just a few minutes, after Spencer has pushed you to the brink of yelling at your monitor, you'll not only have a chance to weigh in, but we'll be following up with each of you to continue the conversation and see where it may lead in our battle to change the map.
In Chicago, we tell the same story using the same map. When we replace the data set, the map stays the same. Which neighborhoods have high poverty rates? Which neighborhoods experience housing discrimination, high rates of foreclosure, predatory lending, food deserts, lack of job opportunities, lack of healthcare access, environmental pollution? And in 2020, which neighborhoods are hit hardest by COVID-19? The map of disadvantage has tracked communities of color for generations. In these neighborhoods, life expectancy is between 15 and 30 years less than their wealthier counterparts. The differences in investment are obvious. The coffee shops, bank branches, investment firms, small businesses, and parks are replaced with payday lenders, currency exchanges, liquor stores, fast food, and dialysis clinics. The story of the map is a story of protecting privilege that has resulted in decades of poverty concentration. Of Chi-Town justifying othering from redlining, inequality, and racial discrimination that gives the good land to wealthy whites, and everything else to minorities and people of color. To the bad narratives we tell about these neighborhoods versus our communities. It happened while we looked the other way. We created this problem, and we're paying the price. This cannot stand. It's time to tell the real story. It's time to change the map. It's not a secret that Inglewood, Little Village, Riverdale, Auburn Gresham, Humboldt Park, Lawndale, and Austin are systematically denied access to capital compared with their wealthier counterparts in Lincoln Park, Gold Coast, Old Town, and Wrigleyville. And while money from these communities is invested elsewhere, they are rising to the immense challenges facing them with courage and heart to build lives they are proud of.
I was out looking for loans for my business. Of course, when you're a first startup business, it's very difficult to get a lender to trust you. In order to get the funding that I would need, I would have to travel outside of my neighborhood, travel outside of my means, just so I can even get looked at. Not even saying it's a yes, but just for someone to sit down with me and see where I stand, and I haven't got that yes yet. But that doesn't stop me. That's not gonna stop my pursuing my business and making sure we remain stable.
Keisha represents one of many entrepreneurs seeking the leverage that their wealthier neighbors have access to when starting and maintaining businesses. The lack of access to capital is what creates the conditions for payday lenders and the like to take advantage of people who are living in poverty. Even cashing a check at a currency exchange has a price.
My clients wasn't able to pay me on a specific day that they said they were going to pay me, so I had to take a hit. Either I use my personal finances or run off the street and try to get some quick cash so I can, pay my employees so they won't feel the tough situation that I was going through. And because of it, I went and I took out a title loan. I believe the original loan was for $1,200. And my goal was to pay it that Friday because I was expecting my client to pay me. And it didn't happen that way. COVID hit and everything went downhill from there. So whatever percentage they were taking, they were using it as a daily rate. So now I was stuck with this loan and end up paying close to $3,000-$4,000 for a $1,200 mistake.
Passing the Predatory Loan Prevention Act freed up $400 million a year in fees being processed off the backs of people like Keisha. But these are not the revelations we want you to sit with. The conversation is this. Even with a big win, our attempts to change the map have been unsuccessful. And until we change the map, we are accepting the problem, not moving toward a solution. So, what do?
We now have over 36 years of data and research to see how effective our efforts have been. The data doesn't lie. The CRA, adopted in 1977, was supposed to change things, but things haven't changed after 36 years. I looked at what was the average mortgage amount that lenders made throughout the city, and said if they had loaned the amount that they did on average in the city as a whole, instead of what they actually loaned, around 50% of what the city average was. And over that 36 years, if instead of what they had actually loaned, they had been making loans at the city average, the South, Southwest, and West sides would have received over $114 billion more in mortgages than they actually did. That was race-based, and it created the segregated system that we have. And now just saying people are equal doesn't do anything about the inequality. It accepts it, it perpetuates it. We talk about leveling the playing field. Leveling the playing field is not the same as wiping the slate clean. We have all of a sudden come to a position where you can't use a race-based remedy to undo the harm that race-based policies created.
Where is our empathy? Where is the America that said the opportunity for all? Well, we've kind of screwed up that opportunity for all for a large portion of our country. And now it's time to make it up. And this is really that call to action. I think this is a moment where saying this might actually get some action started to do something different.
We need more people to commit in the long haul. And that's where Keisha is so unique. She didn't just tell her story one day and then disappear. She's been with us throughout this battle. And we need folks who are willing to be ambassadors in their community for what we're trying to accomplish, A, and B, what we've accomplished, so that we can, we can be successful in our goals of advancing a progressive economic equity agenda and protecting what we've gained so far.
This is a call for more than conversation. These communities deserve our investment of time, treasure, and talent. They are an untapped swell of resilient innovators. It's time to tell the real story, to change the map. Join us.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Woodstock's Director of Research, Spencer Cowan.
Thank you all for joining us. I'm Director of Research at Woodstock Institute, which sometimes makes me the bad news department. I'm the one who gets to tell people how bad things really are. If, as Horacio suggested, what I say makes you mad enough to want to throw things, go right ahead. Or you can speak up during the breakout sessions. The ugly facts for today are from American history and from looking at 36 years of data from Woodstock's Community Lending Fact Book, data about mortgage lending in the city of Chicago. Fortunately, that's the kind of thing I love doing, analyzing data, finding out what they have to say. As anybody who knows me can tell you, I'm a complete data nerd. Some quick facts to start. There is an 8-to-1 wealth disparity between whites and blacks in this country. It's called the racial wealth gap. That gap, by the way, is up from 7-to-1 in 1992. To a very large extent, the racial wealth gap is the result of affirmative action, policies that give preference to one group and discriminate against others. Yes, for many decades, government policies deliberately discriminated based on race, using affirmative action to give preferences to whites. And they weren't subtle about it either. Some examples. Governments used racial zoning to reserve the best neighborhoods for whites only. They required racially restrictive covenants for new developments to keep them whites only. They denied blacks and other minorities access to the mortgages they needed to buy property, most conspicuously with redlining. Beyond being a data nerd, I'm also a recovering lawyer. That's one of the reasons I find it so outrageous that our governments so openly abused the law to exclude and oppress blacks and other minorities. Another reason is that I came of age during the civil rights era and saw that de facto segregation in Boston, where I lived, looked a lot like de jure segregation in Alabama or Mississippi. We were no better than they were. Even more egregious to me than abusing the law is the fact that governments tolerated, even enabled mob violence, including lynchings. The police in Cicero, not far from here, where there were fewer than 6 blacks in a city with a population of over 66,000, tried to stop a black couple from moving into an apartment there. When the police failed, a mob of about 4,000 whites came, drove them out, and set fire to the building. None of the rioters were ever prosecuted for that. White mobs also drove blacks out of established black communities. As I'm sure you've read about, just last week was the centennial of the destruction of the Greenwood neighborhood in Tulsa, Oklahoma. It was destroyed, and blacks were murdered by white mobs, some using weapons supplied by the government. Other race riots, more like massacres, happened in Rosewood, Florida, and Wilmington, North Carolina, and many other places. Tulsa was not an aberration. Those ugly facts are part of our history, just not the part that we were taught. I don't know about you, but I don't recall learning about any of those facts in my American history class. And I took AP American History. Fact, from the end of Reconstruction in 1877 to at least the 1970s, nearly 100 years, governments at all levels stacked the deck in favor of whites and against blacks and other minorities. Racial discrimination segregated our housing, our schools, our opportunities. Racism shaped the structures of the society we have today. Having used racial discrimination to allow whites to acquire almost all of the nation's wealth, governments then changed course. They decided that racial discrimination was wrong, not to mention illegal. They decided to, quote, level the playing field, to make everybody, regardless of race, creed, color, etc., play by the same rules. Now that may sound good in theory, but it does nothing to reduce the overwhelming, nearly 100-year head start that governments gave whites. I mean, if you give me just a 200-yard head start, I can beat almost anybody in a 200-meter race, especially if you make sure the playing field's level. Leveling the playing field is not wiping the slate clean. It doesn't reduce the advantages discrimination gave to those who benefited. It doesn't provide restitution or compensatory damages for those harmed. Leveling the playing field accepts and perpetuates the inequalities that government-sanctioned racial discrimination created. Leveling the playing field also makes it virtually impossible to use race-based policies to remedy the harms that race-based policies created. Right now, a group of white farmers is suing over a program to compensate Black and other minority farmers for 30+ years of racial discrimination in lending by the Agriculture Department. The plaintiff's claim is that the program is racially discriminatory because it excludes white farmers. The Federal Community Reinvestment Act, known as the CRA, is one attempt to mitigate the one type of harm that goes along with racial segregation: disinvestment in communities of color. The law encourages federally regulated or insured banks to lend in low and moderate income neighborhoods and to low and moderate income borrowers, using income as a proxy for race. It respects the newly level playing field. Right now, the federal government is considering updating the CRA. Maybe the data we have will inform that discussion. Now for the fact book data. And I'm sorry if this gets a little wonky. For the sake of simplicity, I call lenders subject to CRA banks, and lenders not subject to CRA non-banks, which includes credit unions and online lenders such as Guaranteed Rate and Quicken Loans. So, how are banks doing? What are they doing what the CRA intends? The first thing that jumps out at me immediately is that banks, the ones subject to CRA requirements, have lost a lot of market share. In 1984, banks originated over 77% of all mortgages in Chicago, rising to 84% in 2007. By 2019, that share had dropped to just 45%. The data also show that until about 2012, the average loan amounts were about the same for banks and non-banks. Then banks started to make generally much larger loans than non-banks. The difference went from 0 in 2011 to over 165,000 in 2016. Banks have also virtually stopped originating government-backed mortgages, FHA and VA loans that are specifically designed to help low and moderate income borrowers buy homes. Between 2008 and 2019, the share of government-backed mortgages that banks originated in Chicago declined from over 61% to 19%. The data in those three charts really trouble me. Banks are losing or giving up market share to non-banks. Banks are originating a smaller percentage of mortgages overall. More concerning, banks have cut back even on originating smaller mortgages and government-backed loans. You know, the types of loans that lower income borrowers need. If the purpose of CRA is to encourage banks to lend to lower income borrowers, banks are doing it less now than in 1984. They're going the wrong direction. Moving on from the differences between banks and non-banks, what do the data show about all lenders in general? What are the implications for the racial wealth gap? Start with something simple, the origination rate for mortgage applications. A sample of mortgage data shows that Black applicants were much less likely to be approved and much more likely to be denied than white applicants. In fact, except for the 1990 data, Black applicants were just about as likely to be denied as approved for a mortgage. while white applicants were roughly 3 to 6 times as likely to be approved as denied. Of course, the origination and denial rates reflect the differences in wealth between Black and white applicants. People with more savings, wealth, for down payments will generally have lower loan-to-value ratios than those with less wealth. So the 8-to-1 wealth disparity, a legacy of past government-sanctioned racial discrimination, affects the odds of applicants being approved or denied today, perpetuating the racial wealth gap. Another way to look at the data is to see whether disparities are apparent in lending in different parts of the city. First, some local demographics. Chicago is, surprise, a highly segregated city and has been for a long time. These maps show the distribution of the population in Chicago. Map 1 from 1980, Map 2 from 2019. Yes, there have been some changes, but too much remains the same after almost 40 years. Blacks and other minorities in the South and West, whites in the North. As an aside, if I'd included the suburbs, you would have seen an all too familiar pattern: the concentration of minorities in parts of the city with overwhelmingly white suburbs surrounding it. Remember Cicero? In 1960, the population was over 69,000, including 4, yes, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, Blacks. To many of us, that seems normal. Sadly, the Chicago region may well be representative of many metropolitan areas throughout the country. Well, I divided the city into 4 regions to reflect their racial makeup, to see whether race correlated with any disparities in lending. The regions are Central North, green, solidly majority white in 1980 and in 2019, with a few mixed neighborhoods. Southeast, red, overwhelmingly minority in both 1980 and 2019, with just a couple of majority white neighborhoods. Southwest, brown. This area transitioned from heavily white in 1980 to mostly mixed or majority minority by 2019. And West, purple, also heavily minority in both 1980 and 2019. Lenders of all types, banks and non-banks combined, originated more mortgages in the predominantly white Central North region, the green line, than in the predominantly minority regions, controlling for the number of owner-occupied units. That might be expected, considering the differences in the approval and denial rates between whites and blacks. Lower approval rates, fewer mortgages. The difference in average loan amounts in the 4 regions are obvious, reflecting another vestige of government-sanctioned racial discrimination. Whites were allowed to buy properties in better neighborhoods, while minorities were restricted to less desirable and therefore less valuable areas. Not surprisingly, therefore, property values are generally higher in predominantly white neighborhoods than in predominantly minority neighborhoods. And lenders will make larger loans where properties are more valuable. The difference in values becomes self-sustaining with the appraisal system, using nearby sales to establish the value of the property for financing purposes. 2 identical houses, one in a high-value neighborhood and one in a low-value neighborhood, will appraise at very different values. Even more disturbing is the recent news that a home with Black residents appraised at a significantly lower value than the exact same home when the appraiser thought it was occupied by whites. The difference in the value of homes, a legacy of government-sanctioned racial discrimination and segregation, perpetuates the 8-to-1 racial wealth gap. To some extent, these charts show what leveling the playing field and CRA have accomplished, at least as far as the impact in minority communities. The gap between the number and amount of originations in minority neighborhoods and in white neighborhoods has increased over the past 36 years. In 1984, 55% of all mortgage originations were in the predominantly minority Southeast, Southwest, and West regions. By 2019, only about 30% were. In 1984, 37% of the total amount of mortgages originated was in the Southeast, Southwest, and West regions. In 2019, only about 18% were. What does that mean in terms of the racial wealth gap? If lenders had originated mortgages at the city average rate and loan amount in the Southeast, Southwest, and West regions for those 36 years, Those three regions combined would have received over $114 billion in additional mortgage investment. 114 billion with a B. And that's just the direct housing impact. Think of how much more equity people in those neighborhoods could have had, wealth, to send their kids to college or help finance a business. Think of the impact on the tax base that supports schools and helps pay for infrastructure. Think about the wealth that people could have passed on to the next generation to give them a head start in life. Enough data. What does all of this suggest? The first implication for CRA reform that I see is that the CRA needs to be expanded to include all lenders, not just banks. Unless the reformed CRA covers more types of lenders, it will miss the non-banks now originating the majority of all mortgages and over 80% of the government-backed mortgages designed to help low and moderate income buyers. Illinois recently passed a state CRA which applies to banks, credit unions, and non-bank mortgage originators. The federal CRA should do the same. The second implication for CRA reform is that the regulators, federal and state, have to set higher standards for performance. Regulators now rate roughly 95% of banks' performance as satisfactory or better under the CRA. They are saying that banks are doing a good enough job now. Good enough? Non-banks were the top lenders in 40 of the 48 community areas in the Southeast, Southwest, and West regions. If non-banks can reach those markets and originate mortgages, regulators should expect banks to do so as well. To be clear, I have no problem with banks receiving CRA credit for purchasing the mortgages that non-banks originate, which seems to be what banks are doing, because that enables non-banks to originate even more mortgages. Mortgages, however, are only one of the services that the CRA is trying to get banks to offer in low and moderate income neighborhoods. If banks originate mortgages for neighborhood residents, that can establish the personal relationships that lead banks offering other services, such as small loans to businesses or personal lines of credit. By outsourcing their mortgage lending to non-banks, banks aren't establishing the relationships that can bring residents into contact with the full range of mainstream financial services that banks are supposed to offer under the CRA. As I said, regulators now rate roughly 95% of banks' performances as satisfactory or better under the CRA. Based on the data I see, there's no way in creation that I would. Of course, it's not just the CRA. Governments have lots of laws and regulations, including the Fair Housing Act and Equal Credit Opportunity Act. It's not that we don't have government policies that could address the racial wealth gap. It's that the laws are not being implemented vigorously enough to reduce the racial wealth gap that government policies created. CRA reform can be a start. The Illinois CRA connects community reinvestment with housing opportunities, fair lending, and chance for minorities to build wealth. The federal CRA needs to do the same. One of the most discouraging aspects of what I see in the data, beyond just the mortgage data that I've talked about here, is that those same geographic areas stand out in so many other maps of disadvantage. If I map life expectancy, infant mortality, poverty, vacant and abandoned buildings, foreclosures, environmental hazards, and any number of other negative indicators, the map doesn't change, just the title. The CRA is a necessary tool to reduce disinvestment in lower income and minority neighborhoods. Who knows how much worse the data might have looked without it? But it is clearly not sufficient to reduce the disadvantages that decades of government-sanctioned racial discrimination created. Yes, the CRA needs to be updated and expanded, and implementation must be more rigorous than it has been. But that is unlikely to change the many maps of disadvantage. How to change the map needs to be part of any discussion of how to reduce the racial disparities that are so evident in so many dimensions. No idea is too simple, complicated, bold, or unconventional. Remember, if this were easy, we'd have already done it. That's the question I want you to think about. How can we change the map?
Wow. Thank you, Spencer. I think it's fair to say that the CRA has become somewhat of the new math of the civil rights movement, where getting the process right is more important than actually solving the problem. I think it's also fair to say that governments set the rules that created today's reality. Governments helped determine where capital went, who got it, and what form. Like you showed, when the FHA required racial governance in violation of federal law and Supreme Court decisions, who held them accountable for what they did? And how are they going to undo the harm that they've caused? So with this as our foundation, let's have some fun. Over the course of the next few minutes, you're going to be thrown into a random group of strangers, one of which will be a board member of the Woodstock Institute. Now, their role is to pull nuggets of brilliance out of each of your brains. Now, while we could get lucky and have one group come up with the ultimate answer that solves everything and reverses aging, it's more likely that each group will have a part of an idea that has never been tried before. Now, if you haven't had a chance to rename yourself to your full name in your company, now is your chance. And when we come back, we'll be hearing from State Senate President Harmon and honoring our champions. Now, to the task at hand and to parody one of my favorite Saturday Night Live skits, financial services and racial equity, romantic comedy or psychological horror movie. Discuss.
Lost my love. They gonna move to the groove. Out of rhythm. My loaded. Said I lost my love. They gonna move to the groove. Out of rhythm. My loaded. Said I lost my love. Lost my love. They gonna move to the groove. Out of rhythm. My loaded. Said I lost my love. They gonna move to the groove. Out of rhythm. My loaded. Said I lost my love.
Welcome back to the main program. As we collect everyone, we invite you to post your discussions in the chat.
Welcome back, everybody. Love that music. By the way, this event actually has its own Spotify playlist, so if you're interested, we can send that to you. Welcome back. Lots of interesting ideas. I heard a lot of good conversation from the offices next to me with some of the people helping to facilitate updating CRA. Yes, absolutely. Illinois can follow the lead, but that's a big task in Washington, D.C. Story collection, very powerful, as we've seen with Keisha, and we will see with Keisha in terms of our successes. Empathy, you would think. Ooh, the R word, reparation. So even going there, which is good. That's what we're looking for. So here's what we propose as next steps. We've made a list of the participants in each group. We're going to be reaching out to each of you to continue the conversations by Zoom, over coffee, lunch, maybe a few cocktails. But this is the beginning of a conversation and the start of a relationship towards trying new ways to achieve economic justice. Now, speaking of economic justice, and not to brag too much, but we've got some rock stars with us tonight. In case you were binge watching The Mandalorian and not the news, in Illinois we closed 2020 as one of the many states in our country with pretty weak consumer protection laws. By the second week in January, Illinois became one of the strongest consumer protection states in the country. Now, this reality was made possible by the efforts of a large group of people, but built off of the courage of a small business owner who transitioned our cause from academic to personal, and a state senator who has spent her career making sure that this country, which prides itself on democracy, can be more inclusive than exclusive. Now, it'd be unfair for me not to mention the contribution of the people that have made Woodstock successful in its work. While you've all met and heard from Spencer, and we'll be hearing from Brent Adams soon, I want to send a shout out to Beverly Berryhill, who has the heavy burden of keeping Woodstock's wheels from falling off. Jane Doyle, a partner with Brent in Woodstock's small, mighty, and tenacious policy team. Janice Guson, who, with Spencer, reinforces the lost notion that economics is actually a social science. Our newest member, Barbara Lacker-Ware, who will be joining us in July as our development director, our fearless lobbyist, Frank McNeil, and our finance team at Supporting Strategies, David, Holly, and Rebecca, who keep us grounded in reality and me out of jail. So with that said, it's time to say thank you to our champions, and I'm proud to introduce the president of the Illinois Senate and my state senator, Dawn Harmon.
As a friend, an ally, and president of the Illinois Senate, it is my honor to congratulate Jacqueline Collins on this recognition for all the tremendous work she does in the Illinois General Assembly. Senator Collins is the driving force behind the Predatory Loan Prevention Act. That act is a vital component of the Legislative Black Caucus's economic equity pillar. Over the past year, she has helped us make history in Illinois as we take the tragedy of George Floyd's murder and honor his life and the lives of so many other victims by pushing forward with sweeping changes to our laws and our communities. Protecting consumers is a passion for Senator Collins, but her emotional pleas for financial justice and equity are backed by hard numbers and research. Many a lawmaker and lobbyist has learned the hard way that you had better do your homework if you intend to debate Senator Collins, because more often than not, she has already outworked you. It makes perfect sense that she would partner with a data-driven advocacy group like the Woodstock Institute. Together, you have given a strong voice to financial victims who suffered the perils of predatory lending. Together, you have made Illinois a better place. Congratulations to the Woodstock Institute, and congratulations, Senator Collins. I look forward to where your mission next takes you, the Senate, and the state of Illinois.
Our work requires partnerships with advocates who care deeply about changing the map. Folks who have been impacted by structural racism are powerful advocates for change. Advocates for financial justice prioritize people over politics. They fight the systems that make the rich richer and the poor poorer.
We lose in Chicago more black kids than the soldiers in Iraq. That's how dangerous it is for our kids now, living in an environment where their safety is put at peril. We have the closing of mental facilities, the foreclosure crisis, so certain communities seem to be targeted.
This is what systemic racism looks like and is reminiscent of the notorious era of redlining and the racially discriminatory policy based on a system of maps that rated neighborhoods according to the perceived stability. These embedded forms of racial discrimination were created by white institutions, are maintained by white institutions, and are condoned by this society.
Now is the time for everybody to come to the fore to say that we do support you. We understand your angst. We understand your anger. We understand why you're in the streets. The streets, Dr. King once said, the rebellions and the revolts that you see in urban turmoil and violence is a result, it's the voice of the voiceless, because they have been denied access to opportunity. Now is the time for us to join forces together with our constituents to move forward and ensure that we have economic investment and empowerment in the community.
Senator Collins exemplifies such a partner. Because of her, Woodstock Institute is able to pursue bold ideas. She is Woodstock's champion and the champion of people who are often left out and unheard. She does not shy away from a fight, is razor sharp when advocating for her community, and she gets it done. From the Mortgage Rescue Fraud Act, the Homeowner Protection Act, and most recently the Illinois Community Reinvestment Act and the Predatory Loan Prevention Act. Her leadership and involvement is a critical part of changing the map.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back Woodstock's Senior Vice President of Policy and Communication, Brent Adams.
Good evening, folks. Thank you for coming. The video you just saw says a lot about Senator Collins. Now I want to share some personal observations that I have gathered from the 10 years or so that I have worked alongside her. Senator Collins is what I call a true believer. A true believer is idealistic. They can envision a better world, an equitable world, and a just economy. And that vision is at the center of their motivation. Other motivations, money, power, connections, are on the sidelines. I was tasked with introducing Senator Collins at a national conference last week. Senator Collins was a keynote speaker. I said that introducing Senator Collins was difficult because her most remarkable qualities come out when you're in the trenches with her, fighting the good fight against well-financed opponents and high-powered lobbyists. During those fights, Senator Collins has a fierceness that is never loud or shrill. It is the fierceness one encounters when trying to convince a wall of steel to bend. The award that I'm presenting to Senator Collins tonight is handed out rarely. It was last given to Attorney General Lisa Madigan in 2013. Now join me in applauding Senator Collins as I present her with the Scheinfeld Award for Lifetime Achievement. Senator Collins, I would like to virtually present you with this award, which says, in recognition of lifetime achievement in promoting economic justice. Before giving you a chance to make some remarks, I want to ask you a question that was not provided to Senator Collins in advance. This is my chance to be Oprah Ellen for just a moment. Sometimes folks are given lifetime achievement awards when they are wrapping up their careers. But you recently completed your law degree and are studying for the bar. Before you say a few words, what's next for Senator Collins?
I think passing the bar should be my first priority right now. But it was important for me to be with you tonight because I truly accept this amazing honor. So passing the bar is my next priority.
Well, having been through that experience before, I feel your pain. But an end is in sight. Now, would you like to say a few words?
Thank you, Brent.
Mm-hmm.
I would, thank you. This award and the legislative achievements this year would not have been possible without the leadership and support of many people. At the top of that list are my colleagues in the Legislative Black Caucus, especially Joint Caucus Chair, Representative Sonia Harper, Senate Majority Leader, Kimberly Lightfoot, Senator Christopher Belt, who sponsored the economic equity pillar in the Senate, Senator Robert Peters, the Senate Black Caucus Chair, and Representative Cam Buckner, the House Black Caucus Chair. I also want to thank my Senate President, Don Harmon, and Speaker of the House, Chris Welch, who both kept their promise and commitment to the Black Caucus. I share this award with many advocates, including AARP, the Catholic Conference, Chicago Urban League, Central Illinois Organizing Project, Capital Good Fund, Heartland Alliance, Illinois PIRG, New America, Citizen Action Illinois, and Woodstock Institute, of course.
I also want to thank the many Republicans who stood up for consumers by supporting the Predatory Loan Prevention Act, especially Senate Minority Leader Dan McConchie and State Representative Andrew Chesney, a Freeport Republican. I hope our joint support for the PLPA can serve as a model for future bipartisan victories for consumers. Here, I would also like to shout out two of my colleagues who have joined us on the Zoom. State Senator Laura Ellman, who now chairs the Senate Financial Institutions Committee, and State Representative Mark Walker. Finally, thank you, Governor Pritzker. Having a progressive governor has helped make our state better, especially for vulnerable and disadvantaged consumers. When given the chance over the past few months, I have tried to stress 2 points as it relates to the Legislative Black Caucus's economic equity pillar and its component parts, especially the Illinois Community Reinvestment Act and the Predatory Loan Prevention Act. First, given the amount of money at stake, the opponents won't give up. Beware of wolves in sheep's clothing, citing unintended consequences. The sheeps go by many names, including installment lenders, pawnbrokers, and deep subprime auto dealers. Regardless of the label, loans that charge more than 36% APR are predatory. So let me assure you, casting a wide net to stop predatory lending was very much an intended consequence. Second and lastly, lenders tried to add loopholes to the PLPA even before it was signed. Before Governor Pritzker's signature on the PLPA had dried, another type of lender started fighting for a carve-out. Over Memorial Day weekend, we were fighting the pawnbrokers who claimed falsely that they didn't know that the PLPA covered them. The pawnbrokers also filed a lawsuit in Sangamon County. And not to be outdone, trade associations representing high-cost installment lenders and auto dealers filed a lawsuit in Cook County on June 2nd regarding the PLPA's requirements that lenders report loan information to the statewide database. Now that the legislature has gone home for the time being, we have a little time to lick our wounds and gather our strength. Our opponents will be back, but so will we. My motto, one word: vigilance, vigilance, vigilance. Working with advocates like Woodstock and armed with the facts, the Black Caucus and I intend to stand firm and fight hard to protect the economic equity pillar, and in turn, the millions of consumers the pillar was designed to protect. Thank you for this amazing honor, and we go forth because the struggle continues.
Thank you so much, Senator. It has been one of the great privileges of my professional life to work with you, and I look forward to fighting in the trenches with you some more. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Now we turn to our next awardee, Keisha Thompson-Warren, and a video about her.
My name is Keisha Thompson-Warren. I grew up in the Beverly Hills, Morgan Park area. I always wanted to be an architect. I like to build things. I'm working on raising the funds to finish my architectural degree. I'll get there. I don't quit. I'm currently full-time employed and I own my own janitorial business. We do janitorial cleans and property preservation. It's a hustle, but we got big goals.
Take on more jobs, bigger jobs, hire more people, which in turn helps the community. But my ultimate dream of the company is to become self-sustaining.
Yeah.
So I can go on vacation.
I hear ya.
I'm serious. But also just to step back and say, wow, we did it.
We did.
And look at it, it's running like a clock. It's just ticking by itself.
Right.
I want my children to have opportunities and not to be scared to become great. So I work hard and push through any resistance and discrimination I might face. I believe that change happens from the inside out. That's why I am not afraid to stand up and tell my story. Our small business supports our family. We all work to make it go. I took out a $1,250 auto title loan at 197% interest to pay my employees when a client didn't pay their bill on time. I didn't know about any of the resources available to small business because of who I am, because I'm a Black woman. And our local banks continually turn me down. They don't give me a chance. When I learned how the payday loan and title lenders take advantage of folks in poverty, I knew it was my time to speak up. While I ended up paying back way more than I took, I'm okay now. But what about the people who get caught in that cycle? What about them? They need help as well. That's when I started speaking out and working with places like Woodstock Institute to get my story out there and to let people know to don't give up. Because now when I get in position, I'm gonna make sure that no one has to go through this. I wanna make sure that there's resources I can say, hey, you go to this, they're gonna help you. They're guaranteed. And whatever it takes to get on that committee or do whatever to form that, I wanna be a part of it. Because this has to stop. The discrimination has to stop.
We are a grass tops organization, working with other nonprofits, grassroots organizations, and impacted consumers to advocate for data-driven policies that make concrete improvement in people's lives. We need people like Keisha, who represent the people we are fighting for, to tell their stories. We are inspired by her tenacity and her willingness to put herself out there. Her advocacy helped the Predatory Loan Prevention Act become law.
But this is a start. Predatory lending is a start. We knocked it out. Now let's start on the next project. Let's start on other things that's gonna help make our community strong and help small business owners like me make it. And I'm for it. I'm for anyone that has struggled. I'm proof. I'm a survivor.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back Woodstock's Senior Vice President of Policy and Communication, Brent Adams.
Hi, folks. I'm back. And before I tell you a little bit about Keisha, I, like Senator Collins, want to recognize the elected officials in attendance tonight. In addition to, of course, Senator Collins and Speaker Welch, we have State Representative Mark Walker, who is the chair of the House Financial Institutions Committee, and State Senator Laura Ellman, who is also chair in the Senate of the Financial Institutions Committee. I also want to acknowledge State of Illinois Banking Director Chase Rowinkle. Turning now to Keisha. Woodstock first met Keisha in April 2020, when the lockdown was in its infancy. A big concern at the time was protecting stimulus checks from debt collectors and predatory lenders. Keisha talked to the media about the importance of protecting her stimulus check from going immediately into the pockets of her title lender. After Representative Sonia Harper introduced the Predatory Lending Prevention Act in the General Assembly in January of this year, Keisha put a human face on the campaign by talking to the media and the legislators about her 197% title loan. Keisha's experience was especially impactful because the money she spent on the title loan, on fees, is money she could have spent to expand her small business and hire more people. I have said many times, but I'll say it again, I'm not especially religious, but Keisha is a blessing, not only to Woodstock, but to the national movement to protect consumers. Now, please join me in applauding Woodstock's Advocate of the Year, Keisha Thompson Warren. Keisha, hello. I would like to virtually hand you this award, which reads, Advocate of the Year, in recognition of courageous advocacy and sharing her personal story to improve the lives of others. Now, before I give you a chance to say a few words, I'm putting my Oprah Ellen hat back on, and I have one question that I have not shared with Keisha in advance. And here it is. Finding people who are willing to share their experiences with predatory lenders is difficult because for many people, they are painful experiences associated with shame or embarrassment. You shared your story multiple times. What made you able to speak publicly about your experience?
Well, the strength of trying to become that business owner, to strive to get to that American dream. There's time out for hiding. Stop hiding. Because if we continue to hide, then the situations will be suppressed and then they will never get resolved. So someone needs to speak out, and I nominate myself. That's totally fine with me. I am not ashamed. I've been through it. Now let's help out the next person so they won't go through what I went through.
Thank you. That's true. Our opponents want us to hide. So you're doing exactly the opposite of what they want us to do. Would you like to now provide some remarks?
I would like to thank Woodstock Institute for just being that angel behind me, giving me that go-to, want to pursue and get this taken care of and pay attention to things financially. That's the one thing that they taught me over the year. Pay attention to close things. I didn't know that there was anything out there stating that what they were doing to us was wrong. I didn't know. I didn't know at all. I thought I was just surviving. So I really appreciate you guys for that. I appreciate my parents for pushing me to just have that extra drive. I will become that strong business owner where I can take care of other young women and other young men that wants to be business owners. I really appreciate my parents for giving me that drive, as well as my loving husband. He's my only employee right now. Between him and myself, we work extremely hard. And my kids, even though they're young, they don't understand, but they do know when mommy and daddy have to work all the time. I appreciate them. I appreciate my family. I appreciate my mentors, the big Tyler. He's the one that introduced me to Woodstock Institute and gave me this wonderful opportunity. I also would like to thank Senator Jackie Collins. She is awesome. Just being in her presence gave me that extra push that I, as a Black young woman business owner, can make it just by her presence. So I really appreciate that. I appreciate her and everybody that's been giving me the love and the push to keep going.
Thank you so much, Keisha. And you say in the video that you want to be there for the next thing. Well, I can't hear you again. We're going to be there with you. Okay. Thank you so much. Now I'm going to hand the mic back to my boss, Horacio Mendez.
There's one more award that we didn't really talk about that needs to be handed out tonight because we wanted it to be a surprise. Brent, I have the following letter from Senator Collins that I've been asked to read before presenting you with this proclamation from the Illinois State Senate. Brent, I write to enthusiastically recognize you as an exceptional man of heart and passion. I am always amazed by your astute mind and your intellectual fervor. Your skills and talent for rapidly grasping complex issues are an invaluable asset in the legislative environment. You not only prove knowledgeable in the policy arena, you are also fully engaged in the work of advocating for my constituents and for vulnerable and voiceless people throughout Illinois. You have proven your servant leadership and loyalty to the people that Dr. King would describe as the least, the last, and the lost. You have demonstrated a remarkable passion for developing new approaches to law and policy. I am extremely grateful for the opportunity to have worked with you in making advancements protecting consumers, homeowners, the poor, and the disadvantaged. Thank you for making me look good as we advance the Predatory Loan Prevention Act and the Illinois Community Reinvestment Act through the Illinois General Assembly. And I will note that this commendation and proclamation from the Illinois State Senate is for Brent Adams, presented this 10th day of June, 2021. Brent, it's an honor to work with you, and it's an honor to call you a friend. Thank you for all that you do.
Thank you very much. Is Keisha on?
I knew you would cry.
I thought I was going to be okay at first.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody, for your patience. You know, in the world of, and my experience of putting on conferences, 80% of everything that goes wrong is technical. And when your entire event is technical, actually, I think we're not doing too well, but we will enjoy a drink around the corner here on South Michigan shortly. Now, each year, we want to come together and celebrate what we've been able to accomplish, hopefully in person and with a hosted bar. Sponsorship are available on that one. Sponsorship opportunities, always welcome. But let's not fool ourselves. Changing the way our economic system works is difficult. And that is a gross understatement. We're trying to jackhammer through calcified layers of unfortunate decisions that have become the foundation of the way things are and the way things work. This goes back to our founding and our constantly shifting definition of who is a member of society and who our social, economic, and political institutions were originally built to serve. The words we've heard over the past year to describe our history are ugly, and we hate to hear them. But this doesn't mean we can't learn from our past or that we can't be better than our past. As Spencer mentioned, this month represents the anniversary of the Tulsa Race Massacre, ignored and wiped away from history books for far too long, but not an unusual occurrence, even in some of our largest cities. Denver and Seattle tried to run the Chinese out of their cities. African Americans were subjected to terrorism and efforts to push them out of Akron, Evansville, Joplin, Springfield, Ohio, and Illinois, Youngstown, Ohio, East St. Louis, Omaha, Knoxville, Johnstown, and Lincoln, Nebraska. Thousands of other smaller towns around the country did the same and earned the label as sundown towns, meaning that African Americans had better not be in town at sunset. Formal and informal ordinances keeping African Americans out of communities continued for decades. Here in Illinois, there's evidence that it continued well into the 1990s. As a result, and equal to the Great Migration was a Great Retreat, where African Americans throughout the country had to find safety in numbers in cities like Chicago. But once they got here, they were limited in where they were allowed to live, which increased costs and density at the expense of wealth creation and living standards. Denying this ever happened is being exaggerated or isn't our problem because somebody else did it a long time ago, has allowed us to construct a narrative, a mindset that becomes baked into almost every system in this country, from education and healthcare to infrastructure and finance. Now, as an economist, I view these episodes as examples of market disruption. When a powerful entity, be it a company, a government, or a segment of society, intentionally distorts a market for its own benefit by getting in the way of a competitive market setting the price for a good or a service, like not paying an appropriate wage for labor or preventing a free market in the purchase of real estate. Now, typically, when that powerful entity is found guilty of disrupting the market to their benefit, there's some form of compensation for the damage that's been done. In this case, though, we've actually institutionalized a disruption by saying, okay, now, everyone has to play by the rules now. While some call that leveling the playing field, roughly translated in slightly more honest language, it means nobody can do unto us what we did unto them. So where is all this heading? I'm glad you asked. The prosperity of our country is stifled when many of our residents lack significant access to capital and are unable to be financially resilient, invest in their futures, and contribute to the local economy and tax base. In economic terms, it's called inefficient. Financially, it costs our economy $16 trillion. Now, let me emphasize that word resilience. The key risk in economic inequality is the loss of social resilience, which I define as our ability to cooperate and act collectively for common goals. This is why some of our earliest states called themselves commonwealths. By this measure, we've been in trouble for a while. In the last 4 decades alone, we've grown poorer and more unhealthy as the top layer of society accumulates more and more wealth. Here's a good example I read just recently in the New York Times. The total net worth of America's billionaires, all 686 of them, has jumped by close to $1 trillion during the pandemic. At the same time, over 23 million Americans reported going without enough to eat. Now, what do you think that does to the resilience of our society? This inequality has left us vulnerable to shocks that, under better circumstances, we would have been able to withstand. External shocks like COVID, or internal shocks like the murder of George Floyd. As unrest over the inequitable distribution of resources and the inequitable treatment of a large segment of our population grows, more resources go into controlling the population than helping it, which is why what we see when police budgets eclipse funding for social services. Each of you with us tonight is in a position to take action in your own way. Our sponsors are investing in Woodstock so we can continue this fight. Keisha did that by having the courage to tell her story and make the theft of predatory lending personal, not theoretical. She chose to become an advocate. And Senator Collins, well, she dedicated her career towards the service of others by giving them a voice and fighting for the legal rights they've been denied for far too long. Now, what can you bring to the table? How can you help us in this cause? This year, Woodstock aims to empower and enhance the voice of minority entrepreneurs throughout the state to ensure an equitable recovery. We're working hard to build the capacity to empower communities by giving them easy access to the data they need to identify who's getting shafted, who's doing the shafting, and what needs to be done to stop it. And we'll either join or lead the fight against racist appraisal practices, pawn shops charging over 200%, mortgage lending discrimination, and barriers to affordable banking services. Everyone has skin in this game because there is so much at stake. We have to succeed. We have to change the map. We will continue to research and advocate for policies that advance that goal. I invite you to join us as a supporter, as an advocate, and in your own work. Thanks to our sponsors that made tonight possible. Thanks for your patience throughout our technical glitches. And thanks to all of you for being part of the Woodstock family. Please join our cause in whatever way you can. Thank you and good night.
Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes our evening. Thank you for joining us as we work together to change the map.
Hello, Woodstock Institute friends. My name is Petra Van Naus, and this is Andy Brown. There was a boy, a very strange, enchanted boy. They say he wandered very far, over land and sea, a little shy and sad of eye, but very wise was he. And then one day, one magic day, he came my way. And though we spoke of many things, fools and kings, this he said to me, the greatest thing you'll ever learn is just to love and be loved in return. day he came my way, and though we spoke of many things, fools and kings, this he said to me, the greatest thing you'll ever learn is just to love and be loved in return. There was a boy. Thank you. We hope you really enjoyed that, especially the last line. The greatest thing you'll ever learn is just to love and be loved in return, which is what the Woodstock Institute is all about. And speaking of, we're going to do another song along those lines. This is called On a Clear Day You Can See Forever. On a clear day, rise and look around you, and you'll see just who you really are. On a clear day, how it will astound you that the glow of your being, it outshines every star. You'll feel part of every mountain, sea, and shore. You can hear from far and near a world that you have never heard before. And on that clear day, on that clear day, you can see forever and ever, forevermore. On a clear day, rise, rise and look around you, and you'll see just who you really are. On a clear day, how it will astound you that the glow of your being, it outshines every star. You feel part of every mountain, sea, and shore. You can hear from far and near a world that you have never heard before. And on that clear day, on that clear day, you can see forever and ever and ever and ever, forevermore. On a clear day. All right, yeah. We like to do one more song for you. This is a gorgeous song and an Academy Award nominated song called A Time for Love, written by the great Johnny Mandel, wonderful film composer. A Time for Love. for summer skies, for hummingbirds and butterflies.